The townspeople never knew her name, but they remembered the white girl who kept leaving food beside the broken bench near Eldridge Pharmacius, if hoping someone might come back to life. Claire Whitmore wasn't trying to start a mission. She wasn't aiming for sainthood or rebellion. She was just tired of pretending not to see. Every afternoon after her nursing shift at St. Mary's Home Care, she'd stop by Charleston's old corner pharmacy with a brown paper bag in hand. Some days it was a turkey sandwich and apple slices. Other days it was peanut butter and 2 bottles of water, always with a napkin, always folded, always with one sentence written in her calm, looping handwriting. "You're not invisible." She never waited. She never lingered. She never looked back. But he always came. Her quiet act of grace changed the entire life of someone who was once treated as if he didn't exist. Stay with us to see how the rest of the story unfolds. Don't forget to hit like and share your thoughts in the comments below to show your empathy for this powerful journey. Jarrell Thomas never asked for anything. He never begged, never stole, never shouted back at the cruel jokes from the men behind the gas station. He just sat on that bench, lean, quiet, alert, in the way only kids who've been wronged learn to be. His backpack was always zip-tight, his clothes always layered, even in summer, as if to keep out more than just the weather. The only thing that ever changed about him was the look in his eyes. The first time Claire saw him, those eyes were flat, unreadable. 3 weeks later, they flicked upward for half a second as she passed. 2 months in, he gave a nod. That nod, to Claire, felt heavier than most people's hugs. Her father, Jonathan Whitmore, a retired police lieutenant with a voice like gravel and opinions as rigid as his spine, thought it was foolish. "You don't feed wolves, Claire. They'll follow you home," he warned, slamming his newspaper on the breakfast table. Her mother said nothing, just stirred her coffee until it went cold. That silence, the kind that echoed more than shouting, had become familiar. But Claire kept going, kept packing, kept writing those notes. Even when the neighbors whispered, even when her co-workers at the clinic offered passive smirks, even when Pastor Neil gave his sermons on the boundaries of good intentions. Claire simply believed in hunger, not just the stomach kind. Hunger for decency, for being seen, for being called by something other than trouble. On a Wednesday that tasted like late summer, thick heat, sticky air, cicadas louder than traffic, Claire approached the bench and found Jarrell gone. No backpack, no napkin, just emptiness and a small folded paper beneath the bench leg. It read, in shaky block letters, "Thanks for not looking away." Claire's heart stilled. She held the note against her chest like a pulse, unaware her eyes were wet until a drop hit her wrist. She didn't see him again. Weeks turned into seasons. Life moved forward. The town forgot the boy. Claire didn't. She kept the note in her wallet, tucked behind her nursing license. Some nights, when patients passed in silence, or no one came to say goodbye, she'd reread that note and remember there was once a moment when kindness made a boy feel real. Then came the winter her father got sick. Pancreatic cancer, fast and merciless. Claire became his nurse, his voice, his only visitor. The man who once stood taller than the town now lay curled beneath IV drips and morphine clouds. And still, even as he weakened, he refused apologies. "I protected this town," he mumbled once, not looking at her. "I did what was right." Claire didn't argue. She just adjusted his blanket and whispered, "I know, Dad." But inside, something broke. a brittle kind of grief that came not from losing him, but from knowing he'd never truly seen the world she tried to live in. The day he passed, Claire didn't cry. Not until the morning of the funeral, when she opened her drawer and found the paper again. Thanks for not looking away. That's when it hit her. Maybe the boy had never disappeared. Maybe he had simply found somewhere better to be. And then, at 10:03 a.m., as the family filed into the chapel, a Rolls-Royce Phantom rolled to a slow stop in front of St. Gabriel's Memorial Church. No one got out at first, just chrome, stillness, and disbelief. Then a tall black man in a charcoal suit stepped from the back seat. Sunglasses, gloves, confidence not born of arrogance, but of someone who had earned every inch of the ground he stood on. Claire turned, breath catching in her throat, as their eyes met. Same eyes, just older, surer. The boy from the bench had returned, but he wasn't a boy anymore. The whispers began before the church doors had even closed. Who is he? Did Jonathan know him? Is he, family? Claire heard them. Of course she did. But she didn't flinch. Her hands stayed neatly folded in her lap, her eyes trained forward, even as her heart raced like a trap door on a faulty hinge. She knew it was him. She had known the moment he stepped from the Rolls-Royce, the way his shoulders squared like armor, the way he paused by the entrance as if listening to an invisible voice tell him it was finally okay to walk in. Jarrell Thomas hadn't come to prove anything. He had come to say goodbye in the only way that made sense to a man who once had nothing. He didn't walk straight to Claire, didn't wave or make a scene. Instead, he took a seat in the very last row, hands clasped, head lowered, silent, respectful, present. Claire could barely breathe. She hadn't seen him in nearly 8 years. The boy with the worn hoodie and bruised wrists was gone, replaced by a man in tailored wool and Italian leather, yet somehow the same. She remembered the look in his eyes that day in the rain, that soft defiance, that fragile dignity. The eulogy passed like a slow river. The pastor spoke of Jonathan's service to the community, his unwavering moral compass, his pride as a father, his decorated years on the force. Claire didn't interrupt. She didn't roll her eyes. But when they asked her to speak, she declined. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been misunderstood. After the burial, as family and guests milled around the churchyard, Claire stepped aside, needing air, space, something real. And that's when he came. "Miss Whitmore." The voice was deeper, measured, but it hit her like a familiar song you hadn't heard in years. She turned, finding herself face to face with him, Jarrell. His posture was that of someone who had learned to take up space without apology, yet still carried the memory of being small. "You kept the bench warm for me. I figured I could at least return the gesture." Claire blinked, the weight of years pressing down all at once. "You remember?" she asked, her voice thinner than she expected. "I never forgot," he said. "That bench wasn't just where I ate. It was where I didn't give up." They stood for a long moment, words fragile between them, like fine china. Claire swallowed hard. "Where did you go?" she asked. Jarrell looked toward the horizon, as if scanning years in the distance. "Out," he said finally. "Out of that town. Out of that life. Out of believing that people like me had to stay invisible to survive." Claire nodded. "I kept leaving food. For months, just in case." "I know," he said softly. "I saw it once, long after I left. It was gone before I got there, but the napkin stayed. Same handwriting. She smiled then, for the first time that day. I thought maybe you hated me, or were ashamed. I was ashamed, he admitted. Not of you, of being seen. You fed someone the world didn't want you to see. I wasn't ready to accept that kind of kindness. Not then. Their conversation wasn't dramatic. There was no crescendo, just the quiet mending of something that had frayed, but never truly broken. I'm sorry for your father, Jarrell added. We never met, but I hope he knew what kind of daughter he had. Claire looked down. He didn't, not really, but that's all right. I knew who I was. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the faded note, the one she'd carried for almost a decade. She handed it to him. You wrote this. Do you remember? Jarrell took it slowly, the paper delicate between his fingers. His eyes scanned the shaky block letters. Yeah, he said, exhaling. That was probably the first time I believed I might have a future. Claire looked at him with a smile, touched by sorrow. Seems like you found one. Jarrell returned the note to her hand, then looked around at the people still watching them from a distance. You know, back then, I used to count how many people looked past me in a day. I lost count most days by lunchtime. And now? Now, I count how many I can help stand up. It's a better metric. She laughed softly, genuine and bittersweet. You came in a Rolls-Royce, Gerald. He tilted his head. I thought about coming in a hoodie for old time's sake, but I figured I owed your dad a little respect. Claire smirked. That car nearly gave Aunt Linda a heart attack. Then it served its purpose. They stood together, the cold breeze threading between their coats, not as strangers reuniting, but as two people who once shared a truth too small for anyone else to notice. And somewhere in the quiet ache of that funeral day, Claire realized something no eulogy could capture. The greatest thing her father had ever taught her was exactly what he tried hardest to hide, that justice doesn't come loud and redemption doesn't always knock. Sometimes it just shows up in a Rolls-Royce and thanks you for a sandwich. The letter arrived 3 days after the funeral, slipped through Claire's rusted mailbox in an envelope so smooth and crisp it looked entirely out of place among the utility bills and local newsletters. No return address, just her name written in tight, precise script, Claire Whitmore. She opened it slowly, careful, as if unwrapping something fragile, and unfolded the single cream-colored sheet inside. I never got to say thank you properly. That bench saved me more than once. So did you. I came back because I needed you to see who I became. Not to impress you, but to remind you that what you gave was never small. There's more I'd like to tell you. If you're willing, meet me Friday, noon, at the place where it started. J.T. Claire read the note twice before sitting down at the kitchen table, the same table where her father once told her not to feed the city's failures. She stared at the old cup rings, the nicked corners of the oak surface, and felt time blur between the girl she was and the woman she had become. No hesitation this time. No weighing of consequences. Just a quiet certainty that some meetings had been waiting years to happen. Friday came with gentle skies and the smell of rain in the air. Claire wore jeans, a gray cardigan, and tucked the old napkin, the one with his childhood handwriting, into her coat pocket like a talisman. She arrived early. The bench was still there, though the paint had peeled more, and one leg sat uneven on the cracked pavement. It looked smaller now, like something from a storybook left too long in the sun, but it was still theirs. Jarrell showed up exactly at noon. Not in the Rolls-Royce this time, but walking, hands in pockets, shoulders relaxed. He wore a dark jacket over a white button-down. Simple, clean, no display. They didn't speak right away. Instead, he gestured to the bench, and they sat, shoulder to shoulder, like no years had passed. "This place hasn't changed much," he said. Claire smiled faintly. "Neither have you, really." He raised an eyebrow. "I hope that's not a bad thing." "It's not. You still sit like you're ready to bolt at any second." He chuckled, the sound softer than she remembered. Old habits. Hard to shake. They sat for a while, letting the world pass in the background. Claire watched an elderly man shuffle by with his dog. A pair of teens argue playfully near the bus stop, the life of the neighborhood marching forward. Then Jarrell turned to her. "I wanted to tell you what happened, after." Claire nodded, giving him the space. "I left town the summer I turned 17, he said. "Took a bus to Atlanta, slept in shelters. Got into trouble once, nothing big, but it was enough to scare me straight. I met a teacher at a youth center named Mr. Lewis. He got me into a GED program, said I was smart. I didn't believe him at first." Claire listened closely, her hands folded in her lap. "Then one day," he continued, "he gave me a copy of that napkin note. He said, 'Somebody believed in you before you even had your name on paper. You owe it to that kind of belief to do something with it.' So I did." He talked about going back to school, getting into a local college on scholarship, building a tech startup with a friend that focused on mentorship platforms for underserved youth. The company had grown, now employing over 30 people, most of them young men and women from rough starts like his. "It's called Benchline," he added, glancing at her, "named after where it all began." Claire felt her throat tighten. She didn't need a thank you, but hearing this, hearing how a sandwich, a napkin, and a smile could grow into a movement, it changed something deep inside her. "I tried to come back sooner," Jarrell said quietly, "but I was afraid maybe you'd forgotten, or worse, regretted it." Claire shook her head slowly. "There was never a day I regretted it. Not even when people looked at me like I was throwing my future away." He looked down at the cracked sidewalk. "They don't see what you saw," she smiled. "That's because I wasn't looking for what they looked for." There was a pause, the kind that doesn't need filling. Then Claire asked, "Why come to the funeral?" Jarrell hesitated. "Because I needed to see if there was still a part of this town worth coming back to. I needed to honor the piece of you that stayed kind, even when it wasn't popular. And I wanted to honor him too, in my own way. I never knew your father, but I know what kind of strength it takes to raise someone willing to defy him for the right reasons." Claire blinked, emotion tugging at the edges. "He never really saw me. Not fully." "Maybe," Jarrell said, "but he made you strong enough to see me. That counts for something." They sat in silence as a breeze passed, lifting the edge of the napkin she'd placed between them like an old flag. Jarrell reached out and smoothed it flat. "I want to make Benchline bigger," he said. "Expand into more towns. Add a community kitchen. I'd like you to be part of it. Mentor, advisor, whatever you want. You started it without knowing." Claire exhaled. "You know I'm just a nurse, right?" "You were never just anything," he replied. And for the first time in years, Claire felt like maybe she hadn't failed her younger self. Maybe small acts really did echo, long after the benches were empty and the sandwiches were gone. Maybe the kind of justice she believed in wasn't handed down by courts or carved into tombstones. but passed forward by the ones who were never supposed to matter. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to change everything. Word spread quickly in Charleston, as it always did in towns with more porches than stoplights. The Whitmore funeral had already stirred enough conversation, but the sight of a well-dressed black man stepping from a luxury car, exchanging quiet words with Claire Whitmore, and then driving away like a ghost from a different world, that sent the whispers boiling over. They didn't know his name. They didn't know his story. But they didn't like how easily he seemed to belong now, in a place where he once clearly hadn't. At the diner 2 blocks from the church, between refills of coffee and cautious glances over Formica countertops, old men speculated. He's some kind of politician? No, Hollywood had to be. You think Claire's involved with him? She always was a bit different. The way they said it, different, wasn't a compliment. Claire heard about it before the week was out. A co-worker at the clinic mentioned someone from the Rotary Club asking about her new friend. The pharmacy clerk made an offhand joke about her being quite the redeemer of lost causes. Even her cousin Lisa called to ask why there was a viral thread on Twitter about the girl who fed a ghost who came back with a suit and a purpose. Claire didn't answer any of them. Instead, she sat at her kitchen table, staring at a blank sheet of paper. Jarrell had asked her to speak at a community event in Atlanta the following month, the official launch of Benchline's mentorship kitchen and its first expansion outside the city. He wanted her to tell the story, their story, the sandwiches, the bench, the boy, the napkin. But she didn't know where to start. It wasn't humility that stopped her. It was the weight of telling the truth in a town that had never wanted to hear it. Her mother stopped by that evening, wearing the same cardigan she'd worn to Jonathan's funeral, still faintly scented with cedar and menthol cream. She sat without invitation, placing a warm container of meatloaf on the counter, as if food might solve what silence couldn't. For a while, they just sat. Claire didn't bring up Jarrell. Her mother didn't bring up the rumors. But when she stood to leave, she paused at the door. "Your father wasn't proud of much, Claire," she said, voice brittle but steady. "But he read every one of those napkins, even after he yelled. Even when you weren't looking. He'd fish them out of the trash before I emptied it." Claire's eyes snapped up, surprised. Her mother nodded. "He didn't know how to say it, but I think part of him hoped you were right." After she left, Claire sat back down and picked up the pen. The words came easier now. In Atlanta, the mentorship kitchen opening was held in a modest but beautiful space. Brick walls, industrial lighting, the smell of freshly baked cornbread, and chili in the air. There were posters with photos of mentors and mentees, laptops open at tables, and a large wooden plaque by the door, engraved with words she hadn't expected. "Everyone who sits at this table has a story worth knowing." Jarrell greeted her warmly. No cameras, no spectacle. "Still nervous?" he asked. Claire smirked. "Still writing the speech on the plane. You'll be fine. Just tell them what you saw." When it was her turn to speak, she stepped up to the microphone, heart thudding, the note still in her pocket like armor. She didn't start with a joke. She didn't try to impress. She just told them the truth. About the bench, about the sandwich, about the note, about the town that looked away, and the boy who survived it. "You don't need to be extraordinary to change someone's life," she said. "You just need to notice when no one else does. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can give someone is proof that they exist." The room fell silent. Then came the applause. Not loud, but real. Like rainfall, like grace. Afterward, a woman approached her with tears in her eyes. She was older, wearing a nurse's badge and a wedding band so worn it looked like it had seen several lifetimes. "My son used to sleep behind a diner in Macon," she said. "He never got a napkin like that. Maybe if he had—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Claire hugged her, not out of pity, but solidarity. Later that night, as she and Jarrell walked through the parking lot, he looked over and asked, "Do you think Charleston would ever host one of these?" Claire smiled. "Number. But maybe it'll send someone here." Jarrell nodded. "One is enough to start." And maybe that's all they ever needed. Not a city, not a movement. Just one more person who refuses to look away. It had been 7 weeks since the Atlanta event. Claire was back in Charleston, back at the clinic, back to walking past the pharmacy every other afternoon. The bench was still there, wobblier, grayer, a little more forgotten, but still there. And every time she passed it, she felt a quiet tug in her chest, like something unfinished still lived in its splintered slats. The town, of course, hadn't changed much. People still talked more than they listened. Whispers still floated heavier than truths. But something in Claire had shifted. She no longer walked with her eyes lowered. She no longer apologized for remembering. One Thursday morning, the new pharmacist, young, clean-shaven, fresh out of Charleston Southern, caught her outside. "You're the woman from that mentor thing, right? The napkin lady?" Claire paused, startled by the phrasing. "I suppose that's me." He smiled awkwardly. "We've had 2 high schoolers leave their resumes here. They said they want to work because someone told them this bench once saved a man's life." Claire looked at him for a long second. "It did," she said softly. "Twice, maybe." Later that week, she returned with a can of oil and a screwdriver, tightening the bolts beneath the bench until it no longer creaked. She wiped the wood clean, not to erase its age, but to honor it. She left no food, no note, just a fresh coat of awareness. Something in her said that was enough. But the town didn't stay quiet for long. The mayor's office reached out. Someone had sent a clip of Claire's Atlanta speech. They wanted to honor her at the city's annual Unity Day event, present her with a Community Compassion Award. The request felt strange, almost theatrical, but Jarrell called that same evening. "I know what you're thinking," he said, "but this might matter to someone still sitting invisible on a bench." Claire sighed. "You always know how to play the heartstrings." "Only because you taught me the tune?" She agreed. The ceremony was small, held in the community center auditorium with plastic chairs and lukewarm coffee, but sincere. A retired English teacher spoke before her. A high schooler shared a poem, and then Claire was introduced. She didn't read from notes. She didn't wear a blazer. She stood in a simple navy dress and spoke like she was sitting across from an old friend. "There's something I didn't say in Atlanta," she began, "something I've only recently learned to believe. When you feed someone, whether with food, with time, with dignity, you aren't just giving them something. You're making a statement. You're saying you deserve to be here. That's all any of us are really trying to prove, isn't it? That we matter." Applause came slowly. A few standing, a few wiping their cheeks. Her mother was in the third row, hands folded tightly in her lap, eyes glistening but proud. After the event, an older black man approached her with his granddaughter. "My boy knew Gerald back in the day. Used to run into him by the train tracks. Never thought he'd make it. Never thought anyone would bother. But you did. And that made us all think a little longer before walking past somebody. That night, Jarrell sent a message. There's one more thing I've been meaning to do. Think the town's ready for it? Claire didn't ask what. She just replied, if they're not, we are. The following Sunday, a new plaque was installed beside the bench, hand-carved in cherry wood, paid for by Jarrell, approved by the mayor. It read, "This bench is dedicated to every invisible soul who ever needed one kind act to believe again. May no one sit here unseen." They didn't make a big announcement, no press, no photo ops, just a quiet unveiling at dawn. Claire stood beside the bench as the sun crept over the church steeple, watching light spill across the engraving. A few people passed, nodded. One elderly woman left a folded sandwich in wax paper at the base of the plaque. Claire didn't move it. She just smiled. The wind stirred the trees gently, and in that moment, Claire understood that legacy wasn't always written in headlines. Sometimes it lived in wood, in silence, in memory. Sometimes it wore sneakers and sat quietly for 4 years, waiting for the world to notice. And sometimes, just sometimes, it came back in a Rolls-Royce and reminded you that nothing given in kindness is ever wasted. 3 months passed before Claire saw Jarrell again. Not because he'd forgotten her, but because life, real life, always moved in quiet currents beneath headlines and plaques. They spoke often, texts, calls, short voice memos. He'd leave between board meetings or late-night walks through Atlanta's back streets. But seeing him again, in person, on that final day in Charleston, felt different. This time, he didn't arrive in a Rolls-Royce. He came in a dusty rental sedan, windows down, radio humming an old Marvin Gaye tune. He stepped out smiling, holding 2 cups of coffee and a box of fresh bagels. "Still prefers cinnamon raisin, right?" he asked. Claire laughed. "You never forget the important stuff." "Never did," he said, handing her the bag. They sat by the bench once more, this time not to fix or memorialize, but simply to exist. To breathe in what they had become, not just symbols, not just a girl who gave and a boy who rose, but full people with pasts, mistakes, and something unspoken binding them tighter than most families ever knew. Claire looked at him for a long time. "Do you ever think about how close it all was? Like, if I'd walked another route? Or if you'd sat one bench over?" Jarrell nodded slowly. "Every day. And I've stopped believing in accidents." That morning, he handed her an envelope. Not thick, not official, just a single folded sheet inside. She opened it and read in his clean, steady handwriting. "Dear Claire, I'm starting a new chapter. Not away from this, but because of this. Benchline has been offered a national partnership. More cities, more kitchens, more voices. And they want someone to lead the human side of it. The care, the stories, the education. I said I'd only take the role if you'd accept one too. Director of Community Programs, full autonomy, flexible location, no suits required." Claire looked up, eyes shimmering. "You want me to run the heart?" "You already do," he said. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stood, walked to the bench, and sat down with both hands resting against the worn wood. She looked out over the quiet street, the same crack in the sidewalk still there after all these years. She could see the ghost of that boy, knees tucked to chest, hiding hurt behind silence. She could see her younger self, awkward, unsure, slipping a napkin beside a wrapped sandwich with trembling fingers. And she could see what they'd become. Not a miracle, but a consequence of care that refused to be forgotten. She returned to him and nodded. "I'll do it, but only if you promise me something." "Name it." "When we open a new site," she said, "I want the first bench placed outside. Doesn't need a plaque, doesn't even need shade, just needs to face the street." Jarrell smiled. "To make sure someone's always watching?" "No," Claire whispered. "To make sure someone's always seen." He took her hand then, not formally, not dramatically, just naturally, like it had been waiting to be held this whole time. They sat that way until the morning thinned into afternoon. No one interrupted, no one pointed. Because sometimes, when a town is lucky, it learns how to see differently. Later that week, as Claire packed up old photo frames and a few books from the clinic, she found a note tucked behind one of her father's war medals. The handwriting was stiff, all caps, but familiar. "She sees what I never could. I hope that's enough. J.W." Claire sat on the floor, the medal in one hand, the note in the other, and cried, not for the man he was, but for the man he tried, in his own fractured way, to understand. On her final morning in Charleston, she walked alone to the bench. A light drizzle tapped the leaves above, soft and cleansing. She placed a sandwich on the seat, not out of habit, but tradition. No napkin, no name, just quiet hope. Then she turned, coat flaring in the breeze, and walked away. Across the street, a young boy, no more than 12, watched her go. He waited a few minutes, then crossed slowly, cautiously. He sat on the bench, picked up the sandwich, looked around, and for the first time that week, he smiled. Some stories don't need to be retold, they just need to be continued.